looks like we have everyone here. So I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you all for attending. The first thing I'd like to do is open with the Pledge of Allegiance. Does anybody want to volunteer with reciting the pledge, or I'll be glad to do it?
I'll do it.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, under one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So let's talk about the agenda. I think Steve sent a note out just before the meeting saying that we're going to eliminate item number 7 on the published agenda, which is getting to know you, because just logistics and getting people ready for that component. So we're deleting item number 7. Are there other suggestions, changes to the agenda?
Commissioner, just a reminder, we talked about it, but so the public is aware that we have an executive session that will be at 11 a.m. So if you were done before, we'll just pause the meeting. If we're in the midst of the meeting, we'll stop to go over to the executive session with Water Right Council at 11 a.m.
Great, thank you, John. Thanks for pointing that out. Any other comments or changes to the agenda? And with that, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as it reads.
And I'll second.
Great. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And the motion carries. So let's move on to the
Commissioner,
consent
I've
agenda.
neglected, I have one matter that Steve's going to kick to me under the general manager's report, just a brief update on something. So it doesn't need to be changing the agenda, but just so you know.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to item number 3, the consent agenda. We'll improve the meeting minutes of March 9th and the claims of March 23rd.
I'll make a motion to approve them. Well, should I wait? Do you have anything
No.
to add, Mike?
No.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of March 9th and the claims for March 23rd.
Second that.
Great. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 The motion carried. So now let's move on to old business. The first item under old business is energy policy development. And I assume Brian's going to lead this?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning,
Please, Brian.
Commissioners.
Good morning.
The reason I prepared this memo with the attached slides was just sort of do a follow-up on the last TEA workshop. As I mentioned in the memo, originally TEA was going to show those 3 slides, which were just a set of questions for the commissioners to think about when we're starting to discuss policy development and what kind of policies should be in place to support the district's future resource acquisition efforts. I wasn't intending today to do a detailed discussion and go through all the slides. It was really, there's a lot of meat in there, a lot of information, and it was just more to give you some background and some things to think about. But really for today, I was thinking more in terms of how the commission would like to proceed in this policy development. I mean, I have some of my own ideas, but it would be a good time to kind of have that discussion. The other thing I'll mention, it's kind of like the Northwest weather, wait an hour and it'll change. The last 2 commission meetings, I've been pushing hard on having these policy discussions because they're driven by a timeline that had a near-term deadline on terms of resource acquisition. And it is my belief that we need to have some policies in place before we start moving down this road of non-federal resource acquisition. But what has happened in the last 2 weeks suddenly there's a window of opportunity there. I've had discussions with Bonneville. I've also had discussions with an NIES group. And it appears we may not have to hit the September 30 deadline of this year to change our resource exhibit in the Bonneville Power contract. That we may actually be able to wait a year and do it by the end of September 2022. And that's huge. That'll give us a lot more time to slow down and get the policy part right. The other thing that's happened in discussions with NIES in just the last couple of weeks, it appears that the process in terms of the analysis of the Ruby Flats solar project and the possibility of getting a developer purchase agreement in place is running on a little slower track than originally envisioned. And also appears that we may not even have a contract offering until this fall, which if we had to hit the deadline with Bonneville in September, we might not get a contract for the solar project until after that, which puts us in a real strange position. We'd have to make a decision about the solar project after we've already made a decision about changing the resource agreement. So what I'm basically saying is there's some balls in the air here. I hope to get it settled down this week, but it appears the commission will have longer, up to a year, to make a decision on whether or not, we go down this path. So I wanted to bring that up front.
And specifically, just to clarify, when you say this path, you're saying about the path of having to provide additional supply outside of Bonneville beyond tier, meaning to access better rates than we would get on their tier 2 tariff.
Better rates, and also to satisfy our CETA requirements as well, bringing in more clean energy. And I mentioned this before, but that's the other big thing going on right now, is there is a lot of discussion within the CETA group, within the NIES group, within Bonneville, about what to do about these, what we call non-specified resources that are in our resource supply mix. If you remember, this is one of the big factors of why we're looking at clean energy from a non-federal source, is because we got a piece of our power supply, less than 6%, that's called non-specified. And under the CETA rules, until they get some clarification around that, by default, they treat that as coal. They treat that as resource from a coal-fired generator. So the default is I won't say dirty resource, but it is a carbon-intensive resource. And that forces us to look elsewhere for a clean, non-emitting resource to replace that. That's still in discussion. You commissioners may have had some discussions with other commissioners on the side, but until that's pinned down, we won't really know where we stand on that in terms of having a carbon intensive resource in our mix. There may be some give there, because the other thing that's come about is if there's no give on, if you call that non-specified resource coal, then all utilities are supposed to have all coal resource out of their portfolio by 2025, well ahead of the 2030 requirement to have all clean energy. So that issue has to be resolved, or you have a lot more utilities than us wondering what the heck to do. And based on the conversations I've had since the last commission meeting, there are a whole bunch of public utilities in the same boat as we are. And a lot of them want to just stay on Bonneville because it's the safe bet. Because of the CETA requirements, they're being forced to look elsewhere, and it's caused a lot of consternation, let's say that. So be willing to answer some any questions you have, but things are in flux right now.
Are there questions for Brian? Please, Mike.
Yeah, thank you all. To say, Brian, as we look for other resources for power and take Ruby Flats in, is one of the studies, and I just thought of this now, is storage. Because how do we go forward when we start to turn to alternative power if we don't have any storage? So is battery storage in the mix of trying to figure out how we can offset with this carbon-free resource?
It could very well be in the mix going forward. That's another issue all utilities are addressing right now, is how to get enough utility scale storage to take on new, large renewables projects. For a small project, it isn't as big a deal. We'd still have to, as I mentioned in the last commission meeting, if we're looking at the Ruby Flats project, we're going to have to buy additional services to handle the variability of that resource. Storage, smaller scale storage could be in that. We're looking at this point, maybe 2 average megawatts from the solar project. Or there's other available services such as Bonneville offers, which is a resource support service that basically takes the output from a variable output project, since it's solar or wind, and makes a flat block out of it. So there's alternatives to storage, but ultimately with all this push to get all this new renewables online, battery or other type of storage has to be part of that, will most likely be part of that mix, whether it's pump storage or battery or something else. I mean, the one that Steve and I kind of were fascinated with was this kinetic energy storage system they developed in Europe, that you actually have a large crane and you're lifting cement blocks, and then when you need energy, you drop a block. It's that so you're storing, you're using energy, hopefully low cost, off peak hour energy to lift those blocks, and then with this computerized system, depending on how much resource you need to handle variability, or within an hour or whatever, you drop the block. And it's kind of a fascinating technology in that it's actually fairly simple, and you don't have all the, we're lithium ion, we're talking precious metals, we're talking about, a very much more volatile, with battery storage, you got to worry about the heat buildup. Essentially, this was just very simple. So there's going to be a lot of neat stuff coming up in the future that we'll look at besides battery storage.
So are there other questions for Brian? I have a couple. So the first thing is regarding policy. One of the policies as a PUD we may want to consider is a decision on whether we integrate efforts to looking at community energy as part of our own supply, or if we treat those as in a separate basket. And reason I'm bringing that up is because there's possibility of us shepherding a project to install a couple of megawatts. But coupling our load cycle and our ramp up with our own production may not be the wisest step to take. The commission may decide it is the wisest step to take, but it's something that needs to be discussed. Whether we're going to shop for everything, essentially, including essentially the word storage, if we're shopping, is the same as the word firming, right? Is that fair to say? Because ultimately, firming is the service that somebody else is handling your storage problem for you. In this case, most likely hydro from Bonneville. So my question is that what do you think of that as one of the policy considerations we should be probably reviewing and making a decision on?
I can jump in there. I think that's one of the key issues. I could envision a world for the PUD where you're doing these community projects, whether it's solar or even something else behind the meter, where you're actually providing a service. And of course, this has to stand legal muster, but you might be developing resources within Whatcom County, small scale resources that say residents of Bellingham participate in and maybe buy a share of the output, but the PUD is never connects those customers to its system. It's a sort of an off-system service we're providing the community, and as long as our costs are covered through contractual arrangements, it should be fine. Or we may have a resource, small scale, that we take into our system because the load growth we're seeing is smaller scale. You know, we might be able to match up a 1 megawatt resource in the county with the fact we're expecting a 1 megawatt load in a certain to come on in a certain year, and it fits. But we're also, when it comes to resources, if there's a large load increase, you know, we're talking about potential out there for maybe a 30 megawatt load or a 300, it's going to be difficult to satisfy that load growth with resources within the community, within the county, and we may have to go outside for that resource. So I totally agree. I think you can see a dual track here developing, and I don't know that it's an either or. It might be just a parallel track. You're dealing with two different things, connected customers and non-connected customers.
Right. Well, thank you for that.
My perspective, yeah.
In the presentation, unless I missed it, there wasn't a discussion, and probably because it's not important for our case, but there was, I wanted to just point out that I noticed that there was not much in the way of discussing transmission and transmission related issues or constraints. And I just wanted to confirm, and it's been such a topic at the regional level. And it's not receiving sufficient, it appears to me that it may not be, I reworded my sentence because I was about to pretend to know more than I do, and I shouldn't do that. It appears to me that there's not sufficient attention being paid to transmission constraints as far as the Northwest regional grid and its impacts on resource adequacy. But so that's why the thoughts on my mind. And I just wanted to make sure that we're paying sufficient attention to any transmission related issues on our meeting our loads.
Yes, and you know, TEA did briefly touch on transmission, but this was a decision early on in the workshop process that the focus would be on the power side, because you can spend just hours just on the transmission piece. Individual utilities and the utility organizations, this is a huge issue for them, particularly when at the same time you've got all these utilities trying to meet their obligations under the state legislation for renewables. It's like the renewables gold rush, and everybody's got to bring, especially the large West Side utilities, Seattle City Light, Snohomish County PUDs, PSE. They're all looking at the same thing. They all have that requirement, and so, but they're all trying to use some of the same transmission paths, and that is going to be huge going forward in terms of getting enough transmission capacity, depending on where your resource is, to get it to your load, get the energy to your load. I listened in. There was an interview with the woman, is the new Secretary of Energy, and transmission. In her talk, transmission was high on that list, that we needed it more and make it more easy to put it in place. For those of us on the ground, and Dwayne, our lead for our facilities and our projects, trying to get a new transmission line permitted is a huge obstacle that we've got to address. you know, you may say it's great. All we have to do is put this transmission in place and we can bring all this new renewables in. I anticipate it's going to take years to get any new transmission corridors or transmission lines in place. I think the best we could do is, you know, reconductor existing transmission corridors or double circuit. So you're adding more lines to the same transmission structure in the same corridor to avoid some of the permitting nightmares you have to go through. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but and stop me, I'm getting wordy here, but PSE went through fire, if you will, to get a new transmission line brought in, the new corridor into the Bellevue area. I mean, years. And I don't think they're there yet, but it was, you know, everybody wants renewables, but nobody wants transmission because it's going to either be in their backyard or it's going to take out some forest land or have to come across wetlands to get to where it's needed. So
Hey,
it's a
Brian,
reasonable
this is
issue,
the, this is the kind of topic that's a federal or state delegation issue that probably would benefit by some specialized state and federal legislation for, you know, efficiencies and streamlining processes for approvals. It's probably something to bring up at a WPUDA conference because it's going to be a statewide, not just a local issue. And it's probably something for the federal delegation that could either bring money, one, or even some streamlined federal permitting processes for these purposes.
yeah, I would agree, John. And the other thing that leads me to believe is that because of this issue of transmission, if you don't need a large amount of resource, that it's going to really force utilities, perhaps utilities like Whatcom PUD, to assist residents in their area with behind the meter technology. You know, basically demand side management, because you can't get the resource you need from outside, that you're going to have to start managing loads on the load side of a meter to compensate for that issue.
so how do those issues show up for us here in Whatcom County? Are they not something to worry about at this particular point, or are there things that we need to be paying attention to regarding transmission?
You know, just in terms of Bonneville transmission, right now there is congestion. I don't want to turn this into a transmission discussion, but there is congestion on the north-south, the main line, if you will, and we're sitting on what's called the northern intertie. There's a lot of power back across the Canadian border. You know, you've got BC Hydro through PowerX selling power south, but the other times of the year they're taking, when, you know, in the winter, they're taking power south to north. So it is an issue, particularly when we're looking at if we had a large load increase and needed to bring in a large amount of power, that becomes an issue.
Okay.
I just wanted to say one thing. I really appreciate all this, Brian, and all these questions that were in the presentation are certainly gonna, you know, take me a while longer to think about. But you know, I'd say that just even based on what's happened between the last meeting and now, I think really figuring out how we can have a shared vision but remain very nimble would be important, just because so much is changing with the policy landscape, with the technology, with federal funding opportunities, and you know, with opportunities in the community. So sort of having a plan where we can also be really responsive to a pretty quickly changing environment here seems like an important part of kind of coming up with our policy going forward.
Yeah, I feel like in the electric utility business right now, a little bit like the polar bear running across the ice, and the ice keeps caving in. So you keep leaping for the next next floating iceberg. So
I'm sure.
Okay, is there any further discussion under 4A, energy policies development?
I might offer just one piece of policy the one core policy that kind of overlays everything is risk management, because I have no doubt we're always going to get power supply to meet our load. You know, Bonneville is always going to be the fallback if we keep our Bonneville contract. It's a pricing issue, and that's where most of our risk falls. And so my suggestion is only that, I haven't even talked to Steve about this at this point, would be to perhaps have staff start working on a draft risk management policy that we then share with the commission and get your input and, you know, revise accordingly. But that risk management piece is kind of central to policy on resource acquisition going forward. And, you know, one thing that we could do is go back to TEA and ask them to give us, you know, a sample or a risk management policy that they've developed or another utility might have used, and use that as a starting point so we don't have to start from scratch. But get working on that. Even though it appears we may have a little bit more time, it'd be nice to start working on a piece of the policy puzzle.
Mike, please.
Yeah, thank you, too. Brian, I appreciate that very much. We have enjoyed for almost 70 years, I think it is, a good, reliable resource of power with, from what I understand, very little risk. And now that we move forward, some from CETA and other things, even BPA, I would really like to hear something from you on a risk factor. So I appreciate that very much.
So any further, did you want Brian to respond to that, Mike?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear anything.
Brian, would you address Mike's comment?
Yeah, the only response I'd have is, yeah, we're glad to move forward on that. In fact, under our PEA work order, they have not expended the budget under that work order. I'm sure we could have them do a little bit of work on that before they hand it over to us.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on our energy policies? Great. Well, let's move on to
Thank you.
4B. And I believe, John, you're going to take this?
Yes, commissioners, I just, as you have all read, we're moved into phase 3 effective to today, under the COVID order from the governor. And that process is that the governor's office and the State Department of Health with local health department will be reviewing the metrics rather than on a region basis, as had been indicated before. It'll be on a county basis, and it'll be every 2 to 3 weeks. And so it's possible that we could retract to phase 2 in 3 weeks. So in discussing this with Steve, and it's our view that the commission should consider whether or not it wants to go back to in-person meetings, and we are recommending that you not at this time, because you could retract. There's inconsistencies. The governor's orders allows your flexibility. You do require, regardless, to provide the Zoom. With the capacity limitations, it's estimated, rough calculations, you're probably 6 or 7 or so people could be in the room after the commissioners, staff, myself, with the 6-foot spacing, the required masking, that's still required, even though you're up to 50% capacity. You're very limited to the number of people that could be in the room, and you then have to provide an overflow space to attend and still provide the virtual meetings. Given that we may be back to phase 2 in a couple of weeks, or again in maybe 6 weeks, it's our recommendation that we do not move to in-person meetings at this time, and retain our current protocol. We are recommending that you look forward beyond that, as I anticipate that when we do get to phase 4, or the proclamations of the governor are over, that people will have become accustomed to virtual meetings, and they will want to attend even if there is in person. So staff, and we've recommended staff start developing a longer term plan for making modifications to allow for virtual meetings to be broadcast during your regular in-person meetings. But for now, we're recommending that you continue the virtual only meetings. We developed, I believe we sent to you a policy for that and a background, and that is on your agenda later regarding the road to recovery and open meetings. And that's draft resolution 789 that's on your agenda later.
Say, John,
Yes.
I'd like to move back to the public meetings as quickly as we can. And I understand what you're saying. But on the other hand, I don't think anything, I do not believe the future will return to the way things used to be with public meetings. I think they're always going to have to provide other resources besides a person sitting in the same room. So I don't understand why we cannot have a public meeting and have other people attend through other resources besides being in the same room.
So let me dive into that, Mike. I agree with you that we will not return to 2019, 2018. When the orders are lifted and the pandemic emergencies are over, I expect to have virtual components to your in-person meetings. The requirement for in-person meetings will come back, and then local agencies will likely have the option to provide virtual meetings. And I expect most agencies will provide virtual in addition to the in-person when the pandemic's lifted. At this time, the risk is still there. You're seeing more variants come into the community. If you saw the paper this morning, there's been an increase in the B117 variant. You're still required to maintain 6 feet of distance, even if you had in-person meetings. You're required to have masks if you're having in-person meetings. You can't exceed a 50% capacity. If you had an in-person meeting where the commissioners were present, staff, myself, you'd have room, assuming Steve, myself, and maybe a staff person. There you'd have room, I think the count was roughly 7 plus or minus spaces for the public to sit. Everyone would have to be spaced 6 feet apart. Then you would also have to provide an overflow capacity for people to be in and watch and participate essentially in person at some facility, spaced and the like, and then also provide the in-person component. That would be to meet the bare minimum requirements under the guidance today. You don't have an overflow facility set up right now. So it's my recommendation that you continue this current protocol for the foreseeable future until you're out of phase 3. Understand again, you could start an in-person component and in 3 weeks be told you have to go back without it. So you're having the organization possibly shifting constantly in its administrative processes, given where you are on the road to recovery, if you move back to phase 2 or even phase 1 or stay at phase 3. So for consistency of operations, consistency of public expectations, it's our recommendation that you maintain the virtual only at this time. You can always revisit that if things settle out as you develop more facilities. But we are, everyone's in a reaction mode, and the best thing to do is try to be stabilized and organized. And so that's why we thought, let's plan for the lifting of the emergency orders at some point where we expect virtual components to be a companion to the in-person meetings. But at this time, stay the course that you've been on. That's our recommendation.
Thanks, John. But I'm hearing back rumors, if you want to call them that the possibility is strong. Nothing will change in this year, 21. It's going to be like 20. So it sounds like you're saying we're going to go through the rest of this year just like we are right now. No public open meetings.
I don't know what's going to happen. I've heard, that by July 1, we might be back to normal. Maybe by September 1, we'll be back to normal. I've heard June 1. I don't think anyone can predict necessarily what's going to happen over the next 6 months with any sense of accuracy, just because we don't know how the vaccine distribution rollout's going to go. It's going very well now. It seems in the first quarter, it's been accelerated. We're having high success in vaccination rates. They seem to be working against the variants that are coming out. If people, and we would encourage, I personally, as a personal comment, not a PUD legal comment, personally encourage people to be vaccinated. It'll help the community. If we get to that point, vaccination, we likely will get to the point that you'll get greater openings. I think we're at a point where we manage hospital capacity, which was a large driving concern in the early days of the emergency orders and the controls, as the overwhelming the hospitals was the concern in 2019 or 2020, in the first half of that pandemic. And I think the vaccination rates have stalled that concern, and now that's why we're getting into phase 3. If we can maintain that, you'll see more opportunities. I think if we get to phase 4, we'll probably have an open meeting requirement come back. There will be pressure on that, but I think you're going to see, if not a requirement, but certainly a practice, or most agencies will add virtual meetings to the in-person component. We're just talking right now of whether you maintain the virtual only component, and that's a commission decision at this point.
Okay. Well, I appreciate, and I have to say, I don't have service at my place. This is my connection to the world, and it fails a lot. And so I know I'm not the only one out there. In fact, we're hearing from people saying we're just not provided with the service we need. Otherwise, we got to get back to public meetings so people can really feel they have connection with us. And I believe there's people who are not connecting with us. Their voice is not being heard because we don't give them an option. But that's not your fault. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying I want to move quickly back into public meetings. And Steve, are you thinking about that from the management's point of view? Are we preparing for the future of how our meetings should be ran? Do we need to buy equipment to make it possible?
Yes, I've asked staff to start looking at having an opportunity to have public meetings, in-person meetings, and bringing in the technology that we can live cast those meetings to, whether it's through a Zoom or whether it's through a webinar, whatever it is. And staff is putting together a list of components that would allow us to do that. The biggest challenge that we're going to have. So yes, we're looking at that, and IT staff and Paul Sigmund are putting that work together. The biggest challenge that we're going to have until the entire separation, 6-foot separation, or if it goes to 3-foot separation, whatever it is the overflow. How are we going to provide that opportunity for people to attend in meeting if we simply don't have the capacity in room space to allow for that, which means that we would have to set up an area, a location for people to do that. Then we'd have to live cast, those meetings to that area, wherever it is. And that's going to be the biggest challenge. But long answer to your question, yes, Mike, staff is trying to put together that.
Well, I appreciate, I'm sorry, O'Toole, for taking up the time, but I also appreciate you allowing me to, at least you're not waving at me saying stop. So I appreciate that. I also have to take into account that of our public meetings, Steve, honestly, staff is our main part of our public meetings. We normally have maybe 3, 4, sometimes 5 public people here, but we give them the option to be here. Right now, we're not given that option. So I don't see it being impossible if staff stayed at their own office, their own desk, their own computer, and joined us that way and let the public come in here. I think we could make it happen, but it's my own opinion.
And Mike, I would just say that the counsel I gave you did not consider staff attending other than Steve in person, other than Steve and maybe one other person and myself as a variable. But the concept was that maybe Ann as the secretary to the commission, Steve as the general manager would be the staff, and staff, if necessary, might be called in on a per matter basis, or as you say, stay back in their office. So when we did the estimates and the count, of the numbers and the spacing requirements, that was assuming most staff were not in the building, in the room.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me share my concern. So I appreciate it. I'll turn it back over to you.
I would.
And the resolution was 790, not 789. My apologies.
I just, another comment, Commissioner Murphy, I don't disagree with you based upon, recent history before the pandemic took over everything. I would agree with you that typically we would not have a problem in providing adequate space for, what I would say is the average public attendance. But that's not the issue. The issue is that if we have something on the agenda that draws interest on, by 10 people in front of the public, we would have to have that other space available. We'd have to have the technology in place to offer that live streaming and interaction between that other space and your meeting room. And we'd have to have, in place staff to actually guard the door, if you would, and, manage the number of people that wanted to come in and then, send them to that other space. So that's the challenge. I think
And
it's.
Steve, I would add that if you can't accomplish that, because all of a sudden 10 people showed up that you weren't used to, and that puts you in a violation, you'd have to stop the meeting immediately, defer it until you could comply, or reschedule that meeting completely. So you might freeze commission business because of that instance. So you really it needs to be planned and organized, and getting these orders. It's like last summer, you remember we were reacting, in a 24 to 72 hour moment to the governor's orders. Now we got a little more headway this time, but the magnitude of work that would have to be done to try to be full compliance and all, considering the variables, you just can't pull together in a matter of weeks.
So I just had a clarifying question for John. And that question
Yes.
is that if all three commissioners are meeting in person, does that automatically trigger the requirement for allowing the public to attend in person? We can't have the commissioners. Can we have the commissioners meeting in person and then not have the public present in person?
No,
Is that-
the way I read it, and I'd have to go, where I recall it, is if you went in person, it would have to be open to in person. You're not, you can't be halfway. You're either doing virtual only or you're allowing in person. And if you allow in person, then you have to meet all the requirements. Now, a commissioner could say, I'm not attending, I'm going to be attending virtually, like in any regular commission meeting. So you could have one commissioner there and the rest of the space with public, but you'd have to meet the spacing requirements. And then again, if you had 10 people show up, that all of a sudden what caused you to violate that, and you didn't have your overflow space was consumed, and you didn't have the live streaming for that, you'd have to suspend the meeting. And so I hope that answers your question, Commissioner.
It does. Is there any further conversation on the governor's open public meetings requirements for COVID-19?
Just one last comment. As we look to creating the technology component of the future, we are also starting to take a look at our office space here and the meeting room space. Not so much in response to the current pandemic issues, but just generally looking at, as we start adding staff and as we start looking at using existing resources at our maintenance offices for staff, we're also going to start taking a look at and revisit a plan that we had several years ago when we did put an addition on to this building here at the office, and that was to expand the conference room, the meeting space. And so we're going to start taking a look at that too. So sometime in the next couple of months, you'll probably be asked to approve the hiring of an architect to take a look at expansion of this building space, which would include expanding the meeting room space. So.
I just had a quick comment to add. Steve and I talked about this in our check-in a few days ago, but I agree with you, Mike, that I think that accessibility has become harder for some folks, but I think it has become easier for others. So I do really support this work that staff's doing to put the technology in to make it easy for people to participate virtually once we are able to go back to in-person meetings, just because the offices are, you know, in a part of Whatcom County that's a little bit harder for some people to get to. And, you know, I think another benefit too of having that technology in place is just having the ability for subject matter experts to present remotely easily. It reduced costs for things like consultants and lawyers that might not be in Whatcom County. So I very much look forward to being able to be with all of you in person. But, you know, I think there are some silver linings in terms of us getting up to speed on this technology transition.
So is there any further comments on the COVID-19 update? Great. Well, then let's move on to the agenda to item 4C, which is the general manager appointment process update. And I'll talk to this point. Since our last meeting, I've had 2 conversations with companies that help with placement of a general manager. One's based out of Seattle. The name of that company is Prothman. And the other company is called Mykoff, and they're based out of Colorado, and they're by recommendation of George Kahn at WPUDA, who's the president, executive director, I guess, of WPUDA. I have just had preliminary conversations, but just in those preliminary conversations, there's a few salient points to convey. A decision that the commission will probably have to make relatively soon in our process is what level of support to get from these firms. Meaning that level of support ranges from an advisory role where they shepherd us through a process that we define to a process that they define to full, meaning involving the minimum involvement or work from the commission to a full placement, meaning where you sign a contract with them and they do all the work to find the right person for you. So I've just discovered that that's a decision we have to make. And my colleagues and I need data to make that important decision on what level of service to ask for. And I've got none of that data for you. I have some of the questions that I'll want to have answered over the next few weeks. But I would like to ask one thing from everybody, everybody listening to me right now, if you've got suggestions for firms that I should talk to, that would be able to, that are potential firms that would be good, provide quality services and are making this decision, please email me and let me know, and I will talk to everybody. And what I will do is prepare some kind of I'm an engineer, so I have to put everything in matrices. So I'll prepare a matrix of some sort. It may be completely unintelligible to my colleagues at the commission. Well, I'll get Steve's help in that regard. But I will try to prepare a discussion about what level of service to ask for from the company that we hire. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, O'Toole, for taking the lead on this. Is there anyone locally that we can work with individually or corporate that can do this for us? You're probably going to hear me say a lot of it to both you and Christine that we are very unique here in Whatcom County, and our responsibilities, in a lot of ways, we're a big player, but we play differently than the other PUDs. I'm not going to say I'm putting down any managers out there, but over the years, I've never found anybody at a PUD managing level that could really, what I would consider, lead us in the direction. And I'll tell you, Steve has set the bar so high and so well for us, and staff has, that I want to make so sure that we don't rock this boat. We have incredible staff. We're moving together as a unit, a team. And I see a lot of other PUDs struggle with that unity and working together as a team. And you'll see a lot of managers come in, you'll see a lot of managers leave, and commissioners, have disagreements among commissioners, and that just doesn't happen in Whatcom County. I don't know how to emphasize how we should be so careful how we move forward to keep that same unity going among our staff and our community. I'd rather work with someone locally. I'm not interested in hiring someone from out of state, even though they might do a great job for other PUDs. So I'm just asking you to keep that in mind, Alto.
Sure, and I did search for outfits that were local. I believe we may have some people in mind that are local that could help us. I'm very open to that. And that's just, being a smaller town, there's not that many options in a smaller community to have that level of service. But I'm absolutely open. If anyone knows anybody who can support me, and so please send me that appropriate contact information. Steve, you were checking with some people in that regard, right? And we didn't know if they were able to support, or did I get an email from it? I don't remember it. I don't.
We had contacts with I think maybe 3 folks in Whatcom County. One of them does professional management, upper level management search for counties, cities, mostly public agencies. My understanding at this time that individual didn't feel that they had sufficient capacity time-wise right now to take on a full search. The other individuals that we had an opportunity to contact, our discussion with them was more around helping the commission get to, the actual search, not do the whole package as you indicated, Commissioner. So 2 different levels of service. And the one firm that we did contact that could do the full search and assist you to get to that selection, that firm said that right now they didn't think that they had time capacity. That's not to suggest that there aren't other firms, at least, more local, maybe Whatcom, Skagit, Snohomish, that have done a lot of work with public agencies. We did not.
Yeah, I'd be glad to talk to them all, because particularly with Commissioner Murphy's point, that'll certainly should be one of the factors that we include in the assessment of which service provider to work with. And what I would suggest is that a conversation doesn't hurt. So I would like to have those conversations with those particular outfits to get them on the list of, and recognizing that some outfits may not be able to provide the full range of services, but ultimately first we need to decide what range of service we want. That's a decision that we have to make first, and then the second decision is which vendor. So I just want to bring that up, is that particularly because of Commissioner Murphy's points, I really want to make sure I get a chance to talk to those people. Go ahead, John.
Commissioner Grant.
Okay. I just was gonna share, I had a conversation with Liz Green, who is a PUD commissioner for Skamania, and they went through a general manager search recently. So I thought it would just be helpful to try to talk to some other PUDs that have gone through it recently. And so just to really briefly share, they worked with George Kahn. He came and worked with their commission to really just help them understand what they wanted out of a new general manager hire. Then working with George, they put a basically job description together. They had a staff person advertise. They got 40 applications. All of the commissioners went through all the applications individually. They decided what their top choices were. Liz called all the references. So they did a lot of it, just their commission. They really only got support from George at the beginning. So I just want to put that out there as a sort of juxtaposition to the path of going with a firm that essentially does everything. So I'm happy to reach out to some other PUDs too, but I thought it was helpful for me to just hear from another PUD that had gone through a process recently. And they really did a lot. Their commission did a lot of the work on their own. So I'm not saying that they did it right or wrong, but it's just another sort of data point for how it went. And they were really happy with the outcome of their process.
That's great. Thank you for that information, Commissioner Grant. I will probably so this is something this is a whole nother potential pathway, which is no consultant effectively, and relying on WPUDA and other PUDs as setting that process and pathway for this placement. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Commissioners, I would just, you have a purchasing policy that provides some, prescribes some processes in steps. And I just thinking of the matrix or a flow chart, if you will, you're looking at hiring a search firm, and then that would assist you in hiring a general manager. So the search firm is a personal service contract. Your policy has the hiring process first define the factors, attributes you'd look for in a consultant. So I think that is what the commission should do first. Is my recommendation is define what you're looking for, and if you need assistance in that, that's what George Kahn could do in the first cut. You could have Steve assist you with that. You could have someone like a Gary Tomczyk, who's a former city manager for Blaine, who's retired, who's been in the financial world, been in they run a utility at Blaine, electric utility. He's retired. He could be available to, and Steve, under his authority, could hire that person to facilitate the district's discussion of defining what you want in a search firm, and then potentially what you want in the general manager's position. And then you go through a competitive process, which is to be defined, whether it's a commissioner soliciting or you have the staff do the outreach for you for the solicitations of the search firm, having the commission having defined the attributes and factors it wants to look for. Then you can direct that search firm once that search firm is retained. I would say that in my discussions in the past with one of the local vendors of a search firm, she's advised me that everybody uses the same software tools now. They all go through Indeed or similar kind of software platform in distributing the advertisement and job description that you have. There isn't a secret call out. Someone like Prothman that's larger and does regional hiring for executives for municipal agencies all the times may have a list. You'll hear later how Prothman searched and took one of our principals in our firm to be the manager at WTA. And so they do have a list internally sometimes of who might be looking to move, but generally everyone uses the same software platform to distribute a solicitation. So again, I would recommend you have a process where you define what you're looking for as a commission in the search firm, what attributes you want to see. Then you go find that search firm through the methods. You define what you're looking for in a general manager, because that's going to guide the search firm. And that's again where a George Kahn or a Steve or a
Gary
Tomczyk might be able to help you in that facilitation.
I think the other opportunity for using someone and may not be a Gary Tomsick or a George Kahn, but someone up front to do that work with the commission, is that you also need to have opportunity to engage with staff and let staff provide an input into not what they individually would want to see in a new GM, but I think that getting to the commission's decision as to what the commission feels that they want in a new GM, it's critical, as you had mentioned, Mike, before, understanding how unique we are, how this culture that we've, developed over the last, 20 some years here with staff involvement and the team that we've built, what staff's perspective is on, what that new GM, what that new leadership really would or should look like. And it also gives an opportunity, I think, for the commission to hear through that person that, that would be doing that interaction with staff to you. It also creates an opportunity for the commission to say, are there some staff resources, internal staff resources here that you might consider filling that position? So I think that, taking that upfront step, I think would be very valuable.
So let's talk about some specific things that would be important to cement again. The process of selecting a GM is a commissioner process, but at the same time, we can leverage the staff of the PUD for the purpose of everything from procurement practices to facilitating discussions and so on and so forth. It's certainly important to recognize. There's been contacts, and I hope continue conversations that individual commissioners have with people that can support the commission. Thank you for your outreach, Christine, on that subject. I think it would be helpful if all of the information that staff has regarding people that the commissioners should talk to was made available to the commissioners. So John, you mentioned a firm or a gentleman named Gary Tomsick. If you could talk to that person and get that person to make some time for a conversation with any of the commissioners. And similarly, Steve, the people that you've talked to, if they can make time to have conversations with the commission on their everything from their general advice on process to actual conversation about what level of service they can provide. That would be useful information, so that then in a subsequent meeting, we can have the conversation on the level of service that we're seeking, which is a very similar statement as to the skills we're seeking. It's almost the same conversation, and decide what kind of an approach we're going to do. And that will set us up for actually selecting, hopefully at the next meeting after that, a firm to actually support us to the degree we need that support. I don't know what George would charge us, but certainly there's a whole range of options that we could engage services to rely on. And Wapuda, which would be wonderful as well. Are there any further discussions on this?
I don't know that I completely followed what you just said, Atul. Can I try to repeat what you said and see if I got it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I feel like we sort of have a few different tracks here. There's this idea of what I'm going to call the facilitator, which is a George Kahn or a Gary Tomsick that would help us organize our thoughts about what we need and how we want to proceed with either kind of all the bells and whistles search firm versus a sort of DIY approach to the search. So let's, for the sake of having the same terminology, let's call that person the facilitator. And you are suggesting that we have conversations with possible facilitators, and then at our next meeting, decide, how do we decide who we want to work with in that facilitator role? Or
So what I'm suggesting is to break up the process in the following way. First, decide the level of service we want. To use I was using the term consultant, but
Okay.
that's fine. We'll use the word facilitator instead.
Okay.
So
All right.
on the minimal range being the deciding whether we want a facilitator.
Okay.
And then on the other end, deciding that we want a placement firm. I would like the commission to first make the decision of what level of service we're seeking. And then once we decide what level of service we're seeking, decide exactly which entity is the best to provide that level of service. Now, that's may not be the right way to break up the problem. I'm open to discussing other ways to break up the problem. But it's difficult to be discussing and comparing a bunch of dissimilar service offerings.
Yes, I agree with that. I wonder, and John, if you could jump in here too and let me know. I mean, I feel like it wouldn't be too hard at this point to put pen to paper describing what we might want out of a facilitator, if we're going to keep using that term. Is that, given that that wouldn't be a very large, I mean, do we want to put a small RFQ out related to that facility? We've mentioned a few different names. In my check-in with Steve, I had a few other ideas. Rather than having a bunch of the commissioners have phone calls, would it make sense to put a very short RFQ out and see if we can see who's interested in possibly helping us with that facilitation role? Or because it's a small contract, is it something that we could do more informally, John?
Yes, it's an informal process for a contract of that magnitude. You're probably talking, less than $2,500, certainly less than $5,000, probably less than $2,500 to have someone basically prepare and attend a meeting to help define what you might be looking for in a search firm. I mean, because the facilitator right now is doing kind of nuanced of two things. If I understand the conversation, and I'm trying to get concepts and terminology buckets defined because I keep hearing, to me, they're blurring, and I hear the two commissioners speak. So one is define what you want of the first search firm, and the other is define what you want of the general manager. And I realize both will inform the other. So those are two definitional things you need. One is what you're looking for a search firm and what you're looking for as a general manager. If we get let's call the pre-facilitator to help you define what you want, that is a rather small contract, it seems to me. Steve could execute the contract. Steve could collect some proposals and outlines and terms and review individually with commissioners. He could make that decision himself if he wanted it. It's under the current authority. You have that delegation. I don't think Steve was going to act unilaterally, given that it is accurate that you decide who to hire as a general manager. So I believe Steve would integrate with you extensively to make sure you're comfortable with that. If you wanted the three proposals informally to be on an agenda and pick one, rather than Steve, you could do that. I would observe that this seems such a smaller item to just who's going to help you initially. Yeah. My observation is it's rather unique to have a commission make that decision of who's going to be the staff person. You usually would have your general manager or executive director identify that person, having some consultation with the commission, and then that general manager picks that person. Then we have a commission meeting to have you define what you want in a search firm, help you define what you're looking for in a general manager, and then you do an RFQ for the search firm. Whether you have At that point, you're going to have staff probably do either the DIY approach. Staff would be your assistants to publicize that, or you have a George Conduit, or you have a Prothman or a Cara Turner or somebody else go through that process for you. And then they collect the responses. Part of this process that pre-facilitator might do is help you establish your ranking system. So when you do a criterion evaluation, you predefine the factors. So then the three of you would define how you rank. And then if you have different rankings on the search firms, how you select that one. But presumably someone's going to rise to the top. And then once you have that one you select, then Steve, myself, and the commissioner may go negotiate the contract and then bring it back for you as a commission to approve that search firm. Then the search firm would go, if you went the search firm approach rather than do DIY, the search firm would then engage and try to find some candidates for general manager based upon how you defined it. And they would bring them back for you to interview, and individually or collectively as a group.
Commissioner Murphy.
Yes, thank you. John is saying, as I think about what John's saying, and I think about our staff, and I think about Steve, I totally trust them to gather all the information for us and give us the very best advice that we can work with to make the right decisions for the future for this organization. If either one of you commissioners feel different about that, but I have so much faith in this staff and the crew and Steve, everyone here, that they would always be looking out for the best interest of the PUD, of the community, as well as us, to give us the best advice. I would like to go in the way I think John is kind of saying. Let's start here with our own staff, with Steve. And then if it looks like down the road for the commissioners, we need to bring an outside in, then let's do that. But I think we could do a lot of legwork first before we ever get to that point. I'd rather be working with people who understand us instead of bringing someone in who has to educate themselves about who we are to get up to speed. But George, go ahead. Christine, I saw you.
Oh, I just was gonna see if I was muted or not. But I will respond. I think so. Just again, Mike, to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying then that you would feel comfortable with Steve making a selection for the facilitator role that would come to a future meeting and work with us to define what it is that we want, both in terms of a search process and probably kind of the beginnings of what we're looking for with the general manager? So are you kind of saying that you want to start with the path that John was just outlining, where Steve would help us identify a facilitator to help us?
Quick answer is yes.
Okay.
I think that with the staff and Steve, there's a strong foundation there for us to build on, to look towards a replacement for the general manager. I don't think we should take advantage of that. And we have the staff and the general manager that can provide us that stable foundation to move forward on replacing. That's my thoughts.
Okay.
Well, let me try to summarize, if that's okay, to make sure we are all on the same page. And so I'm seeing a 3-step process. The first step is getting the help of staff to identify a facilitator. I would like the commission to approve that facilitator, but certainly make the appropriate recommendations and do the appropriate research to do that. As a second step, that the commission work with the facilitator to identify any additional level of services that we need, which it would include at the extreme a hands-off third-party effort, and at the other end something like what Skamania did, but with the help of the facilitator and staff, decide what range of services additional services we have. And step 3 is, of course, executing the process, which is getting a position description written, solicitations issued, and reviewing and interviewing candidates. Is that, are we all on the same page with that proposed pathway? Commissioners, am I close?
I think you're close. I think we're beginning to talk the same language, which is good. So just
I mean, we don't
so
have to
that,
cement that. Also, I just want to say, we don't have to cement that today. It's just, I just wanted to make sure that we're making progress. And
yeah, and I would expect that after we start working with a facilitator, we might iterate again in terms of what our process looks like, and that's okay. That's part of what the facilitator would come in to do, is to help us make a decision about what path we're going on, right?
yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah, and we should respond to that, right? Yeah.
But the idea would be that we, assuming it's okay with Steve, we would delegate the responsibility of selecting a facilitator in consultation with the commissioners, probably through our individual check-ins that we have with Steve, to identify a facilitator that we approve in some way, or we're part of the process in some way. I mean, Steve, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, my thought, if that's the approach that the commission agrees on, my thought would be that I would put together a set of criteria that I would use to go out and talk to, quote, facilitators, and speak to at least 2, possibly 3 in the community, and use that criteria after I receive feedback from each of you as commissioners. I would select a facilitator. I would bring that recommendation on the choice of that facilitator to you and allow you to actually approve that individual. Then following that, based upon the criteria that I've used to, to make that recommendation, and then we would take that, then that facilitator would be able to work with you individually, one-on-one, and with staff, and come back after a series of, interactions between each of you and staff, bring back to you for consideration of, that position profile and the next step. What is the recommendation that facilitator would bring to you in terms of DIY, do it yourself, or selection of a search firm. I think that it would be also helpful for that facilitator to make a recommendation on based upon the input that he or she received from you as commissioners and staff, as to how broad you see that search being, regionally, locally, nationally, and that will help determine, I think, how extensive you want to use outside resources, such as a Protham or some other, national search firm. So that would be my thought.
From your legal perspective, what you've discussed and outlined, I think, is consistent with the competitive process, pre-definition of factors, with an iterative process between staff and with commission approvals of the contract and key decisions along the way that the commission's expressed the desire to be on the front of. I think this meets that competitive pre-definitional factor criteria that's in your policies.
John, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What's your thoughts regarding time schedule? I mean, here we are, we're going to be going into our next meeting in April. So we only have the 13th and 27th. Let's have special meetings. We're moving very quickly through this year is what I'm trying to say. When do we have to have someone, a general manager, on board? I know it's up to the commissioners, but I'm just saying from the legal side, because it's going to take what, a month to work with someone. It's going to take what, a month to put an ad out there. It's going to take a month maybe to bring it down? If we got 40 applicants, we got to bring it down. Do we interview 7? Do we interview 10? Do we interview 5? It
I
all
think
takes months. That's for the months. We need a schedule. What is your
I think that's
recommendation?
going to come up in this process, Mike. I think you're having, no one here is trying to, I haven't heard anyone try to preordain that step 3 that Commissioner Deshmani noted, which is the search process for the new general manager. So you're going to go through the steps to define the factors, define the process. Is it a do it yourself? Is it a search firm? Are you going to have public interviews? Are you going to have interview commission interviews one-on-one? All those questions are to be determined. I would say you are in April. If Steve's last day is December 31st as a full-time general manager, if that was the date we were targeting to try to have a replacement for, or whatever the date is, a transition period after that, those things all sorting out, you do need to work hucklebuck, but you do need to be deliberate at the same time. You have time to be deliberate. You have time to work efficiently. And time to work thoughtful through the process, but you need to get this concrete process down with the predetermined factors and some element of a competitive process that's transparent going. And so I think, like I said, I think this is consistent with your policy direction that exists. I think you're retaining control at the commission level, which is the undertone that I've heard through this in the last few weeks. You're integrating with staff, which I think from a cultural perspective, Steve's raised a concern with, which I think I've always seen the commissioner's head nodding on that. So I think that's kind of a goal too, that I've sensed. I think that you're defining what you want early, which is a good thing. So that'll guide you through the process, both from what a search firm would be and what a general manager would be. And the commission is defining that and with some facilitation, which is maybe helpful as the group. So that's my 2 cents, Mike, in response. Maybe it was longer than 2 seconds.
It's important to put in the context. It's been about a year since we recognized the need for identifying a replacement for the gym, a little over a year. Of course, COVID happened, and we have not discussed with the public a process until this year for addressing the replacement of GM. There were some ideas that were certainly discussed regarding creating some staffing pathways that might lead to the GM position. But now for the first time this year, we're discussing an actual process for identifying suitable candidates who are really suitable to be in the role of GM. And so it's very important to say that it is important to be efficient, and I'm glad we had a productive discussion today. I just want to summarize again then. Our next action is we're asking between now and the next general meeting to identify a candidate for the general manager, identify for the commission's approval a candidate to facilitate the identification of the process for GM replacement, which will include decisions like what are the criteria that we want to focus on for the general manager, what are the level of support services we need from staff as well as from outside services to support that decision. So I don't know that we can specify a dollar amount for that, Steve. That's going to be part of what you're going to have to figure out, but I'm sure it's not going to be a lot of dollars, but whether that's $2,500 or that's $10,000, I don't know. It'll probably be a hourly component to the service, because we recognize that as conversations continue, there may be additional time necessary from the facilitator. I was about to use the word consultant, but I want to stick with one term. So is that something you feel comfortable with, Steve?
Yes, I am. I would, yes, quick answer is yes. I'd like to follow up with a question or comment from Commissioner Murphy about timeline. Yes, I mean, based upon your approval of my contract, which now has a termination date of June of 2022, I think the concept was that the commission would try to have a replacement in place by the end of this year, by December 31st. I'd just like to suggest that that's the timeline that I still am considering, that you're trying to meet. The idea was to have someone in place in my replacement by the end of this year, so that there'd be an opportunity for me to stay in a lack of better terms, mentoring or advisory role for that 6-month period. My thought is that timeline should work. I think that starting today, with the approach that you're taking today and moving in that direction, I think that you should be able to meet that timeline. I would just tell you that I'd be less concerned about, meeting January 1st as if you would drop dead date, to have someone on, as more importantly, to work with staff, work amongst, you, the 3 commissioners, and do it right, and do it in a way that, come, whether it's January 1st or February 1st, that you are totally comfortable that the process worked for you, worked for the district, worked for staff, and that you've chosen the best candidate to fill that position, and that you don't rush, to make a selection just to meet that deadline. That's my thought.
May I ask a question, please? I would like to know why you are not considering using your in-house HR and other staff in part of this recruitment, Commissioner Deshmani.
I'm not sure how to respond to that question.
And I think I would respond. I think that, the direction that the commission has provided, or assuming that they provided today, creates an opportunity for, the use of a facilitator to help us all decide, the commission especially, as to what that process should really look like. And I think that Commissioner Grant indicated earlier, that some PUDs have done it totally using staff resources to go through the final selection process and so forth. I think that the use of a local facilitator will help all of us really firm up that that direction. How does the commission want to proceed? So.
Is there any further conversation on this subject? Go ahead, Commissioner Murphy.
I think that was Ann that was asking that question. And as I think about it, our human resource, HR, that's a good question to ask. Why aren't we taking advantage of not only Steve's time, but our staff, HR and others? So I would hope that we would say yes to that we will include them in helping to reach our goal on moving forward on this. So Steve, is that someone you would look at to be using?
Well, I think it's yes. I mean, that's my, getting back to my earlier comment, is that I think that bringing an outside resource, whether it's a Gary Tomsick or someone else in the community, to help us all have this discussion, creates an opportunity for that person to interact with staff, interact with commissioners. It doesn't have to be, and I don't think it's appropriate to have those discussions in a public setting, but it creates an opportunity to have one-on-one discussions with that person to assist the commission to decide on the direction to take. This is not bringing someone in to simply on their own come up with a recommendation to the full commission as to the direction to take. I think this creates an opportunity for dialogue that can take place, one-on-one in a confidential manner, and that it really creates an opportunity for good, solid staff interaction. Now, that does not replace in any way, shape, or form the opportunity for staff to participate in the actual process. Once we get to that point, then the decision will be, as Commissioner Nishmani indicated earlier, as to what outside assistance does the commission want to use at that point to actually go through the interview selection process, or do you want to take the DIY approach and use staff to really do the advertising, do the help and selection of candidate interview, all that. So I think this is a good approach. It certainly does not inhibit staff interaction or work on it at all. Yet I think it creates an opportunity to actually improve that. So.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That everybody's participating in this process, and what's unique about this process is that it's probably without question the most important role that commissioners have. So it's important for commissioners to be certainly much more intimately engaged in the process than any other decision the PUD makes. And when I mean by engaged, that means not just at the highest level, but also being aware of the bits and bytes of the process. Because it is such an important decision that the commission makes. That in no way eliminates anybody from participating from staff or from other trusted resources of the PUD.
So
it's important to clarify that more engagement by commissioners is not a statement of less engagement by anybody else. It's really just acknowledging that commissioners should be more engaged in this particular decision all the way into the bits and bytes than most other decisions that the commission takes. So that's why I was confused by the question. Great.
It's my understanding then the direction is that myself and staff will work in the next couple of weeks to bring a recommendation to the commission. Hopefully we can do that in the next couple of weeks on selection of a local facilitator to start this process. So.
Great, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
And let's also rely on Steve to convey any other important findings any of us have as commissioners regarding contacts or other resources that would help us all as commissioners be more educated and be more knowledgeable about this important decision that we're headed towards. Great. Moving on in the agenda, Steve, could you give us an update on the new positions that we're hoping to fill?
Yes, Anne, could you share that screen that you prepared?
Take me just 1 minute.
Okay. It's a very, very brief update. I just wanted to let you know, Ann prepared a slide, a couple slides just to show you the various advertisements that Ann has prepared and we've already initiated. And then also to let you know that as of today, we've had a fairly slow response to either of those positions, the energy analyst or the broadband analyst. I appreciated suggestions from Commissioner Grant. We, on the broadband analyst and the energy analyst, we had several, she provided me with several additional contacts in terms of firms or individuals that may be interested. And so here, this is just, and I appreciate Ann preparing this. This is just a couple slides showing you the areas that we have placed advertisement with, Association of Washington Cities, Northwest Public Power Association, Washington PUD Association. And those are just actual examples of NWAPA where we've actually advertised. And did you have, yeah, there's a second one, Seattle Times. Both of those have been placed in the Seattle Times and of course in the Bellingham Herald. And we did send out individual, like I said, individual contacts to firms or individuals that we felt may be interested based upon contacts that Commissioner Grant had noted and that myself had some interest in the discussion around the two positions over the last couple of months. So, and as again, the Bellingham Herald and of course on our own website. So like I said, as of last evening, we had minimal response so far. We have had some responses, but it's been minimal so far. So that's all I had.
Would it be possible for Steve, for you to send the position or Ann could send the position descriptions to the commissioners so we can also forward them to people that might be interested? Do we have like some kind of a position description that we can, or maybe just a link off of our website so that we can direct people to those positions too that might occur
Sure.
over the next few weeks?
Yeah.
It's
Will
on
do.
our homepage.
It's already on our homepage.
Okay, then I can just
Yeah.
forward it off.
Just
of
have
that.
them
Thank you.
direct, yeah, just direct them to take a look at, yeah.
Great, thank you. I mentioned to you NoAnet, but I think you've already reached out to NoAnet on the.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it do we have any indications about if we don't get sufficient response, what our options are? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I expect that we'll have at least some response for both positions.
Okay.
That is not to suggest that any of those responses that we will get would be responses or applications that we actually may consider. But if we end up, I think we need to give ourselves, probably at least a month here, because what we've done is that we've indicated that positions are open until filled. So I would suggest that after a month, if we'll take another look at it. And if we don't, at that time, if we feel that we don't have a reasonable response, that we have applications that we may want to consider at that point, then we need to take a look at our options. And I would suggest that I think that on the broadband analyst, it may be an option to re-advertise and reconsider, in terms of benefits or salary and so forth at that time. On the energy analyst position, I think that may be an option if to look at using one of our consultants to fill that role. But I don't want to go there. I'm hopeful that we have an option, that we've got some reasonable candidates. But I will tell you that, if you look at the Associated Washington City site, if you look at, I just looked at yesterday another website that is just government jobs. It's just a site that anybody can advertise. Doesn't have to be cities, counties, PUDs, or anything. And if you look at NWAPA, and if you look at our own WAPUTA, the broadband kind of analyst or staffing position is right now is very, very competitive. And I'm not saying in terms of dollars, in terms of salary, but just there are a lot of public agencies that are looking. I think they're trying to get ahead of the curve in terms of potential funding options and those kind of things. On the energy analyst, I think Brian could probably respond better than I, but I think that depending upon how engaged, how large your customer base is, and how deeply engaged you are in transmission and distribution and customer, you're also seeing a surge in the demand for those kind of positions also. So we're just hopeful that people will recognize the absolute value of working for Whatcom PUD, and we can bring them on. But I do think that this is, that hopefully we won't have to ask that question, Commissioner, what are our options? But I do think that it also plays into, our discussion about, our own staffing and, the GM and the transition of some of our key staff like myself and Brian over the next couple of years, how we can transition and sustain, our staff resources as we start broadening our role in the community. So.
Yeah, then thank you. And I obviously, we made the right decision. I really believe that. And we're doing all the right things, I think, as far as trying to find the right candidates and all of that, and no concerns at all. I'm just thinking about how we continue to be nimble and supportive. And purchase services occurred to me too. So in both capacities, as if need would be as a stopgap, not as a substitute, unless it's another Dave. But you can only have so many totally dedicated consultants who live in your community. That's a rare thing. But anyway, I just wanted to ask about that. Thanks for that. And we'll be getting that as an update at our under old business regularly as
Right.
well. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Okay, so is there any more comments under item 4, old business? Okay, well, let's move on to new business. And the first item is the approval of the Northwest Intergovernmental Energy Supply agreement for Ruby Flats Solar Project.
I'll take that one, Commissioner. We've been working with the since we joined the NIES utility group at the end of last year. We've been working with sort of a subset of the members on looking at new resource opportunities. And in particular, we've been looking at this, what's now called the Ruby Flats Solar Project. Since the beginning of the year, those members interested in that solar project, we've been meeting online at almost a weekly basis. really discussing what each of our utilities needs are and why we're driven to look at non-federal resources as an alternative to Bonneville. And also looking at if we're going to investigate buying output from this solar project, what criteria are we going to use to evaluate whether or not to proceed to the point of actually entering into a power purchase agreement? We've done this initial discussion in-house. We've developed the criteria for evaluation of the project. And now the next step is we actually have to, roll up the sleeves, get in there and start that, more stringent due diligence work that needs to be done to evaluate the project. So what this agreement that you have before you today and what we're asking approval for is to fund this initial step that we, apply the criteria we've got, do the financial and other analysis needed to help us make a decision whether or not to proceed further. The NIES agreement, the initial, resource investigation agreement, really the guts of it are in Exhibit A. It's an agreement, it's a two-piece agreement in Exhibit A. What we're asking for now is an execution of this agreement, which will then obligate Whatcom PUD to fund the investigation up to a maximum dollar amount of $5,000. I don't expect across the 5 utilities involved that it's going to cost us $5,000 is our share of the total. And I should mention all of the participating members are obligating themselves or will obligate themselves to the same dollar amount. We're sharing equally in this first step, 20% each for the cost of the investigation. At the end of this initial period, there's the option. Some utilities might have enough information. They say, yeah, we want to keep going. Others are going to say, oh, we've decided we do not want to participate in further and we're going to drop out. So the way this contract's set up, in particular, it's displayed in Exhibit A. Those utilities have that option. If that happens, then the remaining utilities have to step up and proceed on their own with completing that investigation. And here again, we as a PUD, we have the option of dropping out after the initial phase. But if we stay in, then NIES will develop the budget for the second part. That will be considered an amendment to this agreement. And so we'll have to come back to commission and ask approval to proceed with the completion investigation, if you will, completing our analysis and obligating ourselves to a share of whatever that second stage budget is. So it's really a step-by-step process. We're putting the toe in. We're going to spend up to $5,000 to find out whether or not we want to go any farther. If we do, then the new budget will be presented. And at that point, it may be that each utility will want a different resource amount. So the proportion of the share of the cost of that budget may not be equal. We might pay 10%, another utility might be paying 30%. That decision has to be made at that point. If right now in the initial investigation, each of us are saying we want to look at 2 average megawatts off the project. That may change in the second stage. So I feel like our financial exposure is pretty well contained. I mean, go through the first stage, reevaluate, do we want to go any farther? Yes, then we pay our share of that budget. At the end of that stage, the second stage, we then have an off-ramp. We can say, okay, we know enough now that we're not going to proceed any farther, and we just drop out. And then those utilities want to proceed, stay in, there'll be another budget. But at that point, they will be entering into power purchase agreement negotiations with the developer. So we've got 2 steps before we get there. And, once the power purchase agreement is finalized and offered, we can either say, yeah, we're gonna buy some of that output, or we drop out. So that's another checkpoint. We'll have to come back to the commission, obviously, for any approval of a power purchase agreement once we get that far. And as I said earlier in our discussion today, we don't expect a power purchase agreement to be available for signature until sometime in the fall. So with that, I'd be willing to answer any questions you have. Commissioner Murphy?
Yeah, Brian, is this for the 2 megawatts at possibly 5,000? Is that study for what? What percentage of this Ruby Flat Solar? Is that for 75 megawatts, or is that for the full 300 study?
Well, first of all, everybody chose 2 megawatts. It was just for the purpose of divvying up the cost of the budget. Like I say, later on, those numbers may change, but if we stuck with the 2 average megawatts, and if you assume, and this is another thing that will come out in the investigation, if you assume that the capacity of that project's, let's say 20%, that 2 average megawatts would translate into 10 megawatts of capacity. So if you add the 5 up, that's about 50 megawatts for the total group right now. They're based on the land that's available for that project. You could potentially put enough of photovoltaic panels on that site to get you up to about a 100 megawatt capacity project. But that's not where we're at right now.
Okay, because I once thought I heard the number 300 mentioned. Another time I heard 75 mentioned. So
I would say it's in the 75 to 100 megawatt range initial, depending on response. If you use a rule of thumb, and we've all been using it, is you figure about 5 acres of land per megawatt capacity of solar. So right now we have, through Energy Northwest, available land, and it's federal land. So they have access to enough land to do a 100 megawatt project now. They'd have to acquire additional land if you wanted to go bigger than 100 megawatts.
thank you.
Yes.
Brian,
Commissioner Grant, yeah.
how long will the initial investigation phase take roughly? Any ideas?
Right now, I'm going to say it's going to be a fairly short process because we've done a lot of work, without being on the time clock in our initial discussions amongst ourselves. I would say about a month, Commissioner Grant,
Okay.
for the initial, and then you go into the completion study. And that could be another month or so, but we're not expecting to be done with any of that until, close to, May, June time period for the complete investigation before we'd ever get into really engaging the developer on a power purchase agreement.
Okay.
All we have right now for the power purchase agreement is just sort of some outline of things. And one of them is that all of the members are looking at a long-term power purchase agreement in the 20-year range. So it's a fairly big commitment if we actually stick with that 20-year term. So, but other than that, we haven't gotten into the details, the pricing details, all this yet.
So, Brian, I have a one-track mind today on this issue. I apologize. So the question is about transmission. A side conversation that happened as part of something that the port is working on. I think I understood in that conversation that there are concerns with transmission of energy, renewable energy from Eastern Washington to Western Washington. Is that part of what's going to be looked at in this study?
Commissioner, it will be looked at. although the scale of the resource we're looking at will make it a lower magnitude problem than if we were looking at a 300 megawatt project, whether it's solar or wind. But it will be looked at. You know, initially we all realized one of the, it's more of a financial constraint than it is a transmission congestion issue, is that interconnection cost. Interconnecting to Bonneville is an expensive proposition under Bonneville's current method of operating. And that's something in the due diligence on doing the financial analysis, we're going to have to look hard at what those costs ultimately are. It appears we might be restricted to, you know, metering. Metering might be the biggest issue, but yes, to answer your question, cut this short, we will be looking at transmission. And that
And
is,
what,
one other thing is, though, all the utilities in the NIES group already have I don't think any of them have a point-to-point. I think they're all NT transmission contract holders with Bonneville. So they can each use some of their own capacity under those contracts to carry their share of the resource. So it's not going to be as big an issue as if we had to get new contract rights for transmission access.
thank you. One of the things I also want to get clarification on regarding transmission is the time. One of the things I understood is that Bonneville has a big backlog of onlining facilities that are physically connected to the Bonneville grid. So it's not a physical barrier in terms of connection, but there's some other bureaucratic, bureaucratic sounds negative. There are other administrative, sorry. Not meaning to cast anything. There's administrative hurdles of some kind that are within the Bonneville system that are keeping those renewable generation assets from actually being turned on and providing power onto the grid and the subsequent customers. Is that correct? And could those kinds of things also be a barrier, because, you know, we have an actual load that we need to fill that's growing, and the concern would be how administrative issues might delay the provision of the load that we buy to our customer.
Just answering that in general, that is an issue. Bonneville's policies and Bonneville's administrative procedures are not in sync with the new reality of bringing new resources on, renewable resources or any resource online and available for, you know, transport over the grid in a timely basis. It's totally out of sync with what's going on generally these days in terms of new technology and new resource acquisition. Bonneville's processes are long. You know, just thinking about an interconnection, if you had to establish a brand new interconnection and you go through a process where you get in the queue, and we're doing this right now, we've got an interconnection request in, you go through, you have two different types of review. You make your application, you get in the queue, wait your turn, and then there's usually two studies. One is a physical facility study to see what facilities upgrades Bonneville needs to make to accommodate your resource. Then there is a second operational, basically long-term planning study to assure Bonneville that there's capacity on the grid to handle the resource you want to bring online. Two separate processes, two different groups involved. You throw on top of this, Bonneville, just like everybody else, is faced with a wave of retirements. You've got a lot of new people in key positions that are still trying to learn the ropes. That's slowing things down as well. So this will be a continual problem. And there's no workaround on this one. You weigh in with Bonneville to get them to change their policies and procedures, and you know, you work the process. So It's the current reality. That's about all I can say. There's no easy answer to it. There's no leverage that we can apply to make it go away. It's a problem that all utilities are facing right now.
Commissioner,
Thank you, Altul. Altul, you made me think of another thing. And Brian, I started thinking about, aren't the power that's being brought into Whatcom County right now is being ran over Bonneville's lines, right? That's their transmission lines. Is that correct?
That's correct. And even Puget Sound Energy uses Bonneville to get into the area. So
I know this is totally separate, but as we look for different sources of energy, we have to run that energy over Bonneville's lines to get it to here. And if they think they can provide us with the energy of the future, are we going to be paying a prime price to bring something else in besides Bonneville's power?
it's really not going to matter in the future. I don't believe, Commissioner, that we're already seeing indications that hydropower, particularly, surplus power, not only Bonneville, I think I used the example before, is Chelan County PUD goes through an auction every few years to auction off a portion of the capacity of their hydro system to third parties. And if you read their minutes and look at what they're doing over there, read their commission minutes, they're having this discussion of whether or not they're undervaluing the hydro that they're selling. And so I think you're going to see, because everybody's realizing that clean energy has a value on top of what it costs to produce. And so you're going to see, I think, all power prices start to float up, whether it's Bonneville or it's a non-federal resource. And where it's going to hit, I think, is on the capacity side. The value of shorter term energy, which I'll call capacity, is going to rise.
Thank you.
well, I think we have an item here in 5A that requires action, but I want to make sure we've had all the discussion we need to have. Is there any further comments or discussion?
Altul, I don't have any more further questions, but I see that we're going to be approving 2 agreements here. And is that one motion, John, or is that going to be 2 separate actions taken?
Commissioner, there's only one agreement.
Mhm.
You're only being asked to approve the one agreement for that includes in Exhibit A, a budget maximum exposure up to $5,000. If we proceed beyond this initial step, the same agreement will be used. We'll do an amendment to the agreement for the next phase's budget. What they've really done is just attached the work order to the agreement. So we have to come back to you for the budget change if we proceed further. So there'll be a possible revisit of the same agreement with an amendment to the budget in the future.
Okay.
My only concern is the amount of money. It's just really concerning. Are you sure? I'm sure there's no budget implications for annual budget, Steve.
I think we got it covered.
Oh, we got it covered. Great.
No, and this is one of the reasons we saw the value in joining the NIES group. We can share those costs, and it's cheaper than our hiring our own consultant.
Yeah. I can make a motion if we're ready. Do you have are there any other questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to approve the Northwest Intergovernmental Energy Supply Specific Resource Investigation Agreement for the Ruby Flat Solar Project.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second. And I'd like to know if there all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great, and the motion carries. Let's move on to 5B.
Thank you.
I just have to help my dog out. She's having a crisis for some reason. Just a second.
Commissioners, I'll take this, and this is a request for you to approve Resolution 788, which is an amendment to our policy for employee compensation for administrative employees. And basically what it is to approve a new job description and a new salary range for our project manager position. And the reason that we're bringing this to you now is that this is the project manager position is one of the 4 positions that we've included in our 2021 budget to fill before the end of the year. And as I've communicated with staff, with Dwayne and Brian and others on this position, we feel that based upon the number of projects and the level in terms of technical expertise that we need to help manage the projects that are coming up in this year and in the next couple of years, our capital project, we felt that we needed to add the requirement of either certified project manager with a number of years experience, or the possibility of a civil or electrical engineer, someone with those credentials to come on staff. And so that's what really heightened our awareness of what the salary range would be needed to get serious applications to try to fill the position for. So what we've done is amended the job description to include those requirements, and then looked at the industry, mostly public organizations around the Northwest, as to what that salary range would need to be to get interested applicants. So that's essentially what we've done. And as you notice, we've indicated that the salary range that we'd like to have your approval for is 75 to 95. We've looked at Anna's found a couple of open application processes in the region for civil engineers, and we think that with this salary range, we may be able to find interested applicants. So that's our recommendation. We're ready to proceed in the advertising and selection of this person. So with your approval, we can start that process.
Any discussion? Great, then I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 788, amending the policy for employee compensation for administrative employees for the purposes of amending a job description and salary range.
I'll second
Great,
that.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Thank
And the
you.
motion carries. Thank you, Steve. Item number C5C, who's handling that? The cancellation
I'll
of a
take that
warrant?
one.
Thank
Tracy?
you.
Good
Thank you, Tracy.
morning.
Morning.
This is actually a check that was issued to a vendor back in January. And the vendor let us know that they never received the check. And to expedite the payment, we paid it with Steve's PUD credit card, so the check doesn't have to be reissued. We're just canceling the warrant.
I'll make a
Great.
motion. Oh, I'm sorry, O'Toole.
Yeah, great. It looks like Steve just found out about it.
No, I was made aware of it. No. I only had 3 calls from the credit card company asking me if that was an approved. No, just kidding.
Great. Sorry, Commissioner Murphy.
But there's a week at the Four Seasons in Maui on that credit card.
I'll make a motion that we authorize the cancellation of a warrant 1120-102 under resolution 789.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second that. I'll second.
So all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Great, the motion carries. And item 5D, resolution 790, I assume, John, you're going to handle that?
Certainly, we've had this discussion extensively already, Commission. This was the topic of the update. Given the new governor's orders on the road to recovery, the resolution we discussed and the policy is there for your approval. I don't need to repeat what we discussed earlier. So I would just recommend a motion to approve proposed resolution 790 and the policy on the road to recovery for phase 2 and 3 of Healthy Washington.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 790.
Second.
Mike, any further conversation about this subject? I know it was extensively discussed already. Nope, okay. Well, all those please indicate support by saying aye.
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 Okay, so resolution number 790 passes.
And Commission will, in spirit of Commissioner Murphy's concerns, we'll continue to update you if we see any changes on the horizon on the governor's orders or what we're hearing through the various organizations we're involved with.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John.
Are there any other items under new business? Okay, then let's move on to the general manager's report.
Commissioners, the only thing I had was, and I noted on here, 6A is special meeting topics. My thought is that possibly in May, that we either schedule a special meeting for this topic, or that we commit to spending at least 2 hours at a regular meeting to cover it. And that is a complete update on water issues, water resource issues. I think that hopefully the state legislature will have adjourned by then, and we will have an opportunity to see what they will make a determination on the adjudication process. There are a couple other bills going through the House and Senate right now related to water resources, watershed planning, and we'll have completed quite a bit of work on a couple of the grants that we're working on. One is a water supply plan, first phase, and then we have started, Rebecca has been fully engaged working on the outreach and education part of that. I've also hopefully will have a report ready on our work with Northwest Washington Fair on the Farming for Life exhibit and our involvement there. I'm supposed to have by 1st of June a recommendation on actually an agreement with the exhibit sponsors up there, Northwest Washington Fair, on how we can define what our resources that the commission approved, how they will be utilized. So there are a number of issues around water resource management that I think that deserve a couple hour discussion at least. And so I was thinking about looking at May for that opportunity. So just to get it in, on with your thoughts and looking, like I said, by the first meeting in May, I would have a recommendation on whether that should be a special meeting or we can cover it in a regular meeting. The other is that, and I think that Brian and I haven't discussed this at much length at all about whether or not we should have a special meeting just on energy related issues. And I don't know, in terms of timing, I don't know, what that looks like, but I think based upon the discussion that Brian brought to you today, that it maybe may be too early, but I think we should keep it on our radar screen And I think that Commissioner Grant and I had an opportunity to have an interesting discussion yesterday with a group of folks talking about the possibility of developing a micro grid project here in the county. So I think there are a number of issues or opportunities to talk about, related to energy that we may also look at either May or June to have that a special session. So just wanted to get that on the radar screen.
And then I had one matter when you're free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had something, commissioners, really with some excitement, where today it's public, actually, it was probably public Friday, but we have hired Peter Raffato as a new principal to our firm. Peter is the city attorney, or has been the city attorney for Bellingham for 15 plus years. He'll be joining our firm in mid-April. His last day at the city will be April 2nd. He's taking a couple weeks without employment hanging over his head, and then will be joining us by mid-late April. Be working with us in the municipal arena. And we're very excited to have someone of his experience and background to join our firm. And I expect that we anticipate him helping me out with PUD and other municipal clients that I have. And so you may see him from time to time, where we will be having the PUD attorney meeting usually occurs in June in person in Chelan. It's going to be scheduled for September in person in Chelan, and we'll be attending that, and Peter will be joining me to get some continued background on PUD matters. There may be some conflicts to sort out with the city. We don't expect that. He thinks, given his role, he hasn't been privy to confidence and secrets on matters that might cross the PUD's path and the city's path, more political issues than legal confidences or secrets, but we'll sort through those if any arise. So you'll be seeing Peter at some point in the future. He'll be probably joining us to learn, as our practice is when that happens. We don't bill his time to you at any fee. We meet, his time may be on the timesheet, but it'll be no charge while he is getting some exposure. But when he's available, we'll introduce you to him formally if you haven't met him before. So that's all I had.
Steve, I guess I just want to quickly follow up regarding the process for what we talked about earlier for the identifying the facilitator.
Mhm.
If you have any hiccups in the process, and please let one of us know, let the commission know, so we can support any kind of clarifications, because I just want to make sure we try to get to the goal of a identified consultant by the next meeting. Something occurred to me while we were proceeding with the meeting. Anything we can do to support that process as far as timeliness. So,
Okay.
Are there any? I guess we eliminated the getting to know you item number 7, and so let's move on to commissioner reports. Commissioner Murphy, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Atul. I did attend the WAPUDA board meeting, and they're doing well in the nominating committee. Atul, I know you'll know that because you're sitting on that board to elect people, so thank you for serving that way. From our treasury report, they said their coppers are pretty full because they haven't spent much money this year, especially with traveling and sending staff to different locations and hotels. So it's actually a good year for WAPUDA. George, under the executive, he indicated that they're trying to have a in-person in-person meeting sometime in July, if all goes well, where we can meet again at a hotel or wherever. However, he says that they like these meetings with the Zoom because the half-day meetings make it reasonable that people can just show up and not have to travel. So we don't spend a day traveling sometime in a meeting and then coming home. And so I think they're going to stay with that. So I think we're going to see some changes in the future, even in that. Short meetings, we'll stay in our locations, and longer meetings, we'll probably meet in person again, but they're working those out. Senator Sheldon, Tim Sheldon, shared with the PUDs that he was very thankful because even Whatcom has been involved with being active in Olympia. And he says that they've really noticed that with all the work of the PUDs, that there's been a lot of great impact done, and legislature is listening. So that's good. That's good to hear. One of the other things that he shared with us is that Washington State will be receiving $15 billion from the feds. Out of that 3.48, legislature will be able to decide where that should go. He called it a splash fund. Otherwise, he feels pretty good that everything that they want to accomplish will be done because they have the funds to do it. So that's a little different. I would like to put in there for us that with that money, I hope we can do something for broadband, that we can put in, do quite a few grants and get some of that money. So I encourage us to be involved in that. There was a lot of talk about the loss of utilities funds to the PUDs. They say there's $200 million that the PUDs across the state have lost, and they're trying to go to the governor to see if there's any compensation. And at the moment, there is none. They even recommended a 50% forgive and work out some kind of payback on the rest of it. And they're still not getting anything from Olympia, saying that they can even do that. It is a big burden for them, they said, because eventually someone's going to pay for this loss, and it will probably be from their customers. And I'm very thankful that we are where we're at because we haven't faced any of this. So I'm very thankful for that. BPA, Scott Wilson did talk about, said that this year's a little drier than normal. So not sure how that's going to impact us. They're busy doing their new contracts for 2028, which Brian's well aware of. Transmission costs, they said, could be going up. So there's that going on. And then Northwest Energy reported they're going to be May the 8th shut down for 40 days to do maintenance. And it's going to be a little tricky because of the COVID still there. They have to hire 1,000 workers to do this. So it's going to be a big challenge for them. Regarding the CEO, Brad, he's going to be retiring in June, but so is a Sid. I can't remember Sid's last name right now. Do you remember Sid's?
Sid Logan.
Sid Logan, yeah, Logan. He's going to retire. Now, he's been around for just about as long as the mountains have been around. He's been there a long time, incredible amount of knowledge. So it's going to be a big loss for Energy Northwest and all of us. I do actually talk to Brad Wednesday. I have a meeting set up, so I'll be interested to hear what he says, where they're going to go with the CEO after that. And I think that's just about it. Also, too, I will not be able to attend to the water committee, which I believe is tomorrow, the 25th, I think it is. Maybe that's
25th, yeah, Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday. I will not be able to attend that. So I just want to bring that to your attention, seeing if you would step in and represent Whatcom. Okay, I appreciate that. The other thing is I was reading under Northwest Public Power magazine about Grant County and what they've been doing with fiber. And I thought that maybe we should kind of talk to Grant County, because due to the COVID 2020, because they were set up, they were able to take on 3,500 new customers. It was a 63% increase for them. And already in 2021, they're expecting by December to have another 67%. And it sounds like they're doing very well. And I think they said they've made revenue of 10.6 million so far. So they're doing well. So I'd like to keep them as one of those we may want to talk to in the future. Might be someone good for us to talk to. That's it. Thank you.
Great, Mike, thank you. That was a very helpful summary and report. I will strive to do my notes as well as you do. That was really well done. Thank you. Christine?
Yes, okay, so trying to go in order. So March 11th, I testified in support of the Public Broadband Act, so House Bill 1336. And I testified alongside several other PUD commissioners, George Kahn, I think Steve watched he was there too. So that went pretty well. There was a lot of public support for 1336. A lot of people signed in and a lot of people were testifying in support of it.
And your testimony made a really big impression on a lot of people. I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, I took a page out of John Sitkin's book and I actually wore a blazer. So I think that must have done it. So then on Friday, George Kahn convened a quick call with the telecommunications committee, legislative committee of PUD commissioners to talk about this tension between 5383, which is the Senate bill related to public broadband, and 1336. And they've been working with Senator Wellman, who is the one that is the sponsor of 5383. And they've been talking to Representative Drew Hansen, who is the sponsor of 1336. And Steve was also on that call. I think that what is happening right now, they're having an executive session in 2 days, I think, on that. But essentially, my understanding is that they're trying to figure out how to merge the two bills. And I think some of the key issues, the PUD Association has made it really clear about some of their issues with the bills, including the veto power of the state broadband office and in general, the role of the broadband office. So I'm trying to track that as closely as I can. And also was part of the PUD Association orientation on Wednesday, and we heard a really great presentation from Chris Walker with NoaNet. And I also reviewed the proposal that you sent along, a tool that NoaNet provided, and in general was just really impressed with them and would look forward to hearing more about how they might be able to support us. And Steve was also able to join that presentation on Wednesday. So Steve and I have been really out in the community together, I guess, on Zoom. But Steve and I also talked with the Mount Baker Foundation about their work on broadband efforts in Whatcom County. And as Steve mentioned, we also talked with some folks from Lummi Island that are interested in developing a microgrid similar to a project that Orcus Power and Light worked on, as well as progress with the electric ferry that the Lummi Island is looking at, and roles that the PUD might be able to play to support that effort moving forward. And then lastly, as I said before, I've touched base with both Liz Green and Deborah Lester about their general manager search process suggestions, and plan to reach out to a few other folks. And then I guess one other thing too is that I've been in touch with Port Commissioner Ken Bell, and we will be meeting soon to talk about our work on broadband between the port and the PUD. There's still no date set for an EDI meeting related to the port's request, but I have been working with Steve on talking about some of the draft interlocal agreement language between the port and the PUD, and want to keep the relationships and conversation going between our commission and their commission. So I think those are all the key things that I want to report for now.
Great, thank you, Christina. As a follow-up on the Lummi Island conversation, I just wanted to say that the county has planned the ferry to be a diesel ferry. they weren't able to get the funding that they were looking for. So there's no ferry currently being designed or built, replacement ferry. From what I understand, that the county is seeking the appropriate funding, and it's possible that the microgrid solution could be part of a solution for the ferry too, because the electrical infrastructure you need to do to put in a distributed generation system on the island might also provide fast charging capacity for an electric ferry. Totally like just too much detail on something that you brought up, but I just wanted to share that. So, and if you continue to pursue that, that would be certainly something that would be attractive.
Christine, you're muted.
Thank you, Steve. So the outcome of the meeting Steve and I had is that Brian and Steve will be joining a meeting with the Lummi Island residents and many other stakeholders, including Apalco, Orcas Power and Light. They'll be sending an agenda with everyone, but we will be attending a follow-up meeting to see how the PUD may be able to play a role in assisting with this effort.
Maybe if I may offer, and the engineer who's working on this at Whatcom County too, as far as the ferry might or may not be interested. I just.
And Steve, I think you were gonna, well, Steve, you can jump in here because you were maybe gonna reach out to the engineer at the county, right?
I was gonna, it's my understanding, with our discussion with folks from Lummi Island, that John Hutchins, this comes under the purview of John Hutchins as Public Works Director at the county, and I'm going to reach out to John and have some discussion. And also, I indicated that I and Brian doesn't know anything about this yet, but that we'll try to have a conversation with Orcas Island Power and Light before that meeting that Commissioner Grant is talking about, to get some sense of how they put their project together and how it relates to backup power and how they're utilizing that microgrid. It's a battery solar substation arrangement there on Decatur Island. So just we're going to have follow-up discussion with the county and with Orcas Island Power and Light before that meeting I think the meeting is April 14th. I think that's what it's scheduled for. So yes, I think and there was quite a bit of discussion at that meeting with two individuals from Lummi Island. One of the individuals on the call was actually a member of the Ferry Advisory Committee with the county. And so he's talked extensively about just what you did mention, Commissioner Deshmani, is, the potential for this to create an opportunity for fast charging on the island for the ferry, because that's basically where the ferry is going to be home ported. We also talked about the possibility of whether a microgrid project like Orcas Power and Light did, can that support then charging stations for, auto, cars on Lummi Island and that kind of a thing. So looking forward to, I think it could be an exciting opportunity for us to be engaged in the community. So.
And just as an FYI, I think the engineer, his name is George Mead, and I sent you, Steve, I just sent you his contact.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
At the county. Thank you, Christine. That was also a wonderful update. Thank you so much. I have updates primarily from WPUDA as well. I talked about the conversations that I had with placement firms. So I attended the WPUDA sessions on Thursday, and I after listening to the other two reports from Commissioner Murphy and Commissioner Grant, I will leave out things that were already stated. So regarding the telecom committees, the 5383 versus 1336 topic got discussed thoroughly. There's a telecom workshop on May 19th and 20th. I encourage everyone to attend. It sounds like they haven't finalized the agenda, but it sounds like one heck of a great primer for or primer, depending how sophisticated you are, for telecom for our community. The subject of federal funding came up again, and the number I got, Mike, was 100 billion. I don't think know if that's the same number you got, but you know, a billion there, it's enough. A topic that came up in the telecom workshop was funding for a new source of funding that's just been released to support connectivity for minority and tribal communities. And no one that brought it up. And I believe no one that brought it up. So anyway, they weren't aware of the opportunities that were up here in Whatcom. And yes, it was no one that brought it up. And they're going to follow up with me on the subject. So just to make sure that they have connections to the appropriate telecom broadband people whose names I do have at the Northwest Indian College. I will be following up on that. Interestingly, some time ago, I shared when I was attending the Energy Northwest meetings that there was some interesting discussions happening at one point between Energy Northwest and NOAANET, you know, potentially the idea of an acquisition. But quite often, one discussion leads to another. And so, and although the acquisition subject isn't really a focus today of NOAANET, they are having some very interesting collaborative discussion regarding the benefits of smart grid thinking that NOAANET can provide on the activities of Energy Northwest. So I thought that was really interesting. Regarding the Energy Committee meetings, I think it's important to say that Nicholas Garcia at PUD has really done a very important service. We've had a lot of high-level general statements. We need to worry about resource adequacy. We can't just keep increasing renewables and not think about, you know, balancing and what's the other word? All the other words about fleshing up renewables intermittency. But I would say the most important work going on in the North, as far as I understand, which is limited, very, very limited, is the work that's happening at the Northwest Power Conservation Council. And they've done a draft report and a revised draft report. I don't think it's still the final report, addressing the thing that we think about when we think about grid reliability typically, which is the term LOLP, loss of load probability. And the results of that study have been somewhat surprising. And particularly the discovery from that study has been that the loss of load probability is going to go up a little bit in the next couple of years, but then it's going to drop substantially. Now, this is a very important departure from the kind of the communication of the public power community, because there's a statement that increased renewables won't increase the reliability of our grid and reliability of service. But certainly in the midterm, this data is contradicting that. Its actual modeling is contradicting that. Now that doesn't mean that we don't need to worry about reliability, that we don't need to worry about resource availability. It's just that in the midterm, our hydro storage capability, which is the big dams, not the shallow dams, the Columbia River dams particularly, which are really very well suited to be storage dams and to be providing balancing and storage and all of those desirable qualities for the renewables, have ample capacity to take up, to produce less when renewables are producing, and then quickly adapt and produce more when renewables are not producing. And that is really interesting new understanding that we have that at least for the midterm, we're in a good place. Now, the problem is to not become complacent and not think long-term. And I just want to make clear that there still is a relevant and important point about in the long term, we do need to keep thinking about not 4-hour storage, which batteries do, but thinking about, multi-day, week-long storage, which things like compressed air, hydro, gravity-based ideas have the potential of addressing. And, other new technologies. So there was a lot of conversation about this 8th power plan, which the Northwest Power Conservation Council is trying to provide input to on solar, wind, and so on and so forth. Once again, the topic of Cedar rulemaking came up, and other PUDs also asked Nicholas Garcia to be available to provide input to their PUDs and on CETA compliance, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, how to comply with. So I suspect that Nicholas is going to have to do a road show this summer, and I'm sure we'll be on that list because we've explicitly asked for it. In the government relations committees, there was, legislation has been very, very focused, but today is the PUD Day on the Hill. I notified our legislative delegation, and I don't know if the actual legislators are going to go, but many of their staff are going to get free food, their staff. So they're going to be happy to get the free food. So that starts at 12:30 for those for the commissioners. If you are planning to participate, I'm planning to participate, time allowing, in that event, and there'll be a Zoom chat rooms, for the purpose of connecting with your legislators. Let's see. There was a APPA update, and even though it was, again, we've already mentioned this, it was regarding broadband, and Representative Dalbeni expressed an interest on supporting efforts to improve mapping. And since that's an issue of that I've raised previously about the importance of having accurate maps, I plan to follow up with Steve. We should schedule a time to follow up with Congresswoman Dalbeni's staff on the subject of maybe how they might be able to support us on our desires to better map Whatcom County as far as level of service. I'll follow up on that. And then in the Water Committee, I thought it'd be interesting to share with Brian and Steve that Skagit PUD is actually implementing a micro hydro system. I think also with Canyon Hydro. We've had Canyon Hydro come out and assess inflow micro hydro in our system, but they're actually implementing a solution in Skagit PUD. And they actually got funding from Puget Sound Energy and TransAlta. The TransAlta coal, something related with the coal shutdown, there was some funding allocated for the purposes of supporting low carbon solutions. So Skagit PUD got money from 2 large investor-owned utilities, which is really funny, to implement their micro hydro projects. So I thought that was interesting. Ideally, we also have, as Commissioner Murphy has identified, the potential to use BPA energy efficiency money once we figure out if we proceed with those projects. We might hopefully that we can get support from BPA on that front too. And of course, the Water Committee that Mike already mentioned this Thursday. So that's my report on. I wanted to mention one other thing on my own, as just as partly because I'm also a planning commissioner and we're discussing the shoreline management. I've also been attending something called the Nearshore Summit in between other work that I do, trying to listen to what's going on. And I found it to be very good education on understanding the marine habitat that occurs in the ocean near shore and in the creeks and rivers and all of that too. And it's a great education on the waterfront. I look forward to maybe knowing a sliver of something that Rebecca doesn't know. But we'll see though. I'm saving them for the right conversation to see if I actually know something that Rebecca doesn't know. So just look out, Rebecca, if you're on the call, if you're in the meeting. All right, that's my report. Thank you. So, any more, I guess nothing else under commissioner reports? Any comments? Great, so let's move on to public comment. Ann, can you handle that from us?
Currently, we don't have any public comment.
Great, then I'll go ahead and close public comment. And let's see, it's 10:46. Sorry, John.
Well, close, real close. Done well. You did well.
Right. So what maybe what we should do is take a 10-minute break and rejoin the in executive session a few minutes before 11. Does that sound good for everybody?
That sounds good.
And
Sounds great.
Mike, you'll hold the fort down for us? Great, thank you. All right, see you all shortly. So we're all here, and we just got out of executive session, which lasted how long, John?
We lasted an hour and a half and no action is taken, and we are, and no action will be taken out of that executive session.
So we're ready to adjourn. Is there anything else for the good of the order today? Okay, then let's call the meeting to close. Thank you.